I think we're all aware that anime's got quite a few tropes and some very common genre conventions. There's a lot of series about incompetent guys having very romantically tense, often also sexually tense, interactions with girls who absolutely want to bang them, but will never end up doing so. There's a lot of series about cute middle or high school girls just sort of hanging out and being friendly, and if the series is doing its job right, adorable. You've got your sports, you've got your shonen action, you get the idea. Something that has become incredibly common is to introduce some unique concept or twist into these frameworks in order to stand out and hopefully make things interesting. Ever wonder why you get those hilariously long-winded light novel titles like, "No, I'm not making this up. I've already saved this world and taken its wealth and power, and I live happily in a castle with a female knight and a demon queen, so to all other heroes, stay out of this fantasy world." It's because these concepts have been established to such degrees that you've got to go into so much specifics just to get to the part that differentiates your story from them, while paradoxically also naming all those tropes it does contain, so any fans of those specific ones will be sure to check it out. This is what the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya was mocking already over a decade ago. This insertion of strange, intriguing concepts into these somewhat mundane, codified formulas in order to create something of interest. Supposedly being subconsciously brought into existence by Haruhi because otherwise high school life would be too boring for her, and also by extension for us, the viewers. Then there's the incredibly ballsy Endless 8 arc, which served to mock how audiences will watch what is basically the same formula again and again by giving them literally the same formula again and again, to further demonstrate the points that this really clever series was making. Two of the most popular cute girl series from this season illustrate that tendency rather well. What's Gabriel Dropout's gimmick? The cast is made up of angels and demons, visiting Earth from heaven and hell respectively, with the loose pretense of doing so in order to learn about human culture. The joke is that the two angels are different varieties of terrible people, one of the demons is actually a saint, and then the other is a chunibyo. For character archetypes, we've got Rafi as the outwardly incredibly cordial girl with a hidden dark side, Gabrielle is the Umaru-chan-style useless layabout gamer, Satanya is the aforementioned chunibyo, and Vinay is the straight man. If you've seen Digibro's video How to Distinguish Cute Girls Anime, you'll recognize some of these, but Gabriel Dropout does liven things up by bringing in the bratty gamer and chunie, not archetypes common to the most stereotypical styles of cute girls anime. Interviews with Monster Girls makes its cute girls cast stand out by making them, well, monster girls. It also exists in a bit of a subset of cute girls series that involve a cast of students with various traits that cause issues for them. Sayonara Zetsubo Sensei used the setup to do a parody of sorts of harems, but since then we've had series such as Anne Happy, which were more straightforward cute girls comedies. Both of these series, while sporting competent craftsmanship, are generally reliant upon these novel attributes to drive interest in much of what occurs, and would lack much substance without them. Which should be noted in the face of all of these efforts to add some novelty to otherwise stale premises, however, and what this season's Dragon Maid reminded me of, is the fact that the presence of these novel elements is not always an indicator of a series that would be mediocre without them, of one that is relying upon them to carry an otherwise uninteresting premise. The show's PV certainly didn't help dispel a perception of it as being likely to be nothing more than a generic Yuri rom-com, with the wrapping of lines like, but the series' excellent execution has put on display how these points of interest can be added with specific artistic intent, and be implemented in a manner that isn't merely serving to make an otherwise dull premise interesting, but rather to add to and enhance the ideas of an already engaging work. Dragon Maid is a show about adults, which, while not totally non-existent, is still infrequent enough to be refreshing in and of itself. What's really remarkable about the series is its exploration of family specifically, though. In recent years, the cute kid being cared for by an adult trying to find their place in the world setup has become a bit of a subgenre in and of itself. Usagi Drop is a prominent, slightly older one, and since then we've gotten series like Barakamon, Amama to Inazuma, and Poco's Udon World. But what Dragon Maid does to really shake up this formula is be a show with a strong aspect of parenthood that involves two parents, and explore that dynamic. While it was present in Barakamon to a lesser extent, since the primary focus for Honda was on his own personal artistic growth, and Naru was never quite a daughter figure to him, in many of these series, the specific struggles of single parenthood take center stage, and with Dragon Maid we get to see an entirely different set of challenges. I loved watching Kobayashi and Toru taking their de facto adoptive daughter shopping for school supplies, both picking stores whose supplies Kana was unhappy with before realizing that they'd been picking ones that aligned with their own tastes, and not what an elementary schoolgirl would want. Kobayashi is happy to see that her choices of practical stationery haven't changed at all since she was a kid, and Toru's ready to extol the virtues of quill pens. But all Kana wants is some damn unicorns on her damn pencil case. And as expected, the delightful visuals the KyoAni staff put on display create such a perfect contrast between Kana's displeasure and her eventual joy, that as simple, childish, and somewhat unimportant as these emotions of hers may be, I was invested in this tiny arc of hers enough for it to carry an actual emotional payoff. It's Dragon Maid's justification of its what some may call gimmicky elements that make it truly stand out, though. Immediately following those previous scenes, we get a scene that's really elevated by the fact that Toru and Kana are dragons. It could have just been an excuse for the women's large tits and an enabler of some gags like the one with Toru's tail, but we get a heartfelt discussion about how those perceived as outsiders get treated, given particular relevance because in this case it's concerning to Toru and Kobayashi due to the potential implications such attitudes could have for Kana in school. And these concerns are lent some more weight by the fact that Kana is a dragon, and thus has a particular vulnerability to those exclusionary attitudes. The fact that Kana is literally an outsider to such a strong degree serves to put this universal parental concern in direct, bold terms, and helps the audience to connect to this aspect of parenthood, even if they don't have children themselves. Kana and Toru later discuss the separation they feel from humans, being the outsiders that they are, but Kana eventually convinces Toru that making the effort to open herself up and bridge that divide is worthwhile, that she shouldn't just live among humans, she should live with them. And nowhere is this process of opening up put on more prominent display than in her relationship with Kobayashi. Now, Yuri is common enough that it may not seem like a gimmick in the same way dragon people or monster girls are, but it's unfortunately often implemented in a gimmicky manner, where it's largely inconsequential to the series overall outside of being a shallow point of appeal. So many series will have suggestions or innuendos whose potential narrative or thematic implications go entirely unaddressed because the actual Yuri present is so insubstantial that it has virtually none of those implications for the anime. The romantic element in this series is fairly subtle, so one could not unreasonably assume that any actual concrete relationship was being pushed aside or hidden away in much the same manner it is in so many other anime. But that's what makes Kobayashi-san so gosh darn interesting and admirable. The narrative and thematic implications of that downplaying of the romance do get addressed, because Kobayashi's character arc is all about that downplaying and pushing aside of deeper connections with those around her, as she tries to work out how exactly to deal with expressions of sincere affection. Those flirtatious gags that would be almost totally throwaway in other series hold a degree of weight in this series, where they represent Toru's largely ineffective and unreciprocated expressions of affection. It isn't as if the show is even framing this as commentary upon Yuri, or constructing it in order to make a statement. This simply comes about naturally as a result of the nature of the story being told. While it may not be readily apparent, since she's fairly personable and we see her life mostly once Toru has become a part of it, Kobayashi is a bit of a loner. She gets confused when Kana becomes bored with the video game and wants to go play outside. And why wouldn't she? How in the hell is Kana bored when she's got Dark Souls there to play? Wait, is that Dark Souls 2? Okay, maybe it's Dark Souls 2. Makes sense, never mind. Recounting that as a kid, she spent her days playing video games, which would explain her relative lack of socializing. She's friendly with one coworker whom she shares some otaku interests with, and will go out drinking with them, but outside of that relationship, it seems like she's largely isolated from social contact. It's not all that unusual, the stereotype of the somewhat geeky coder who lives alone and doesn't get out much, but it's important context for understanding her relationship with those around her, Toru and Kana especially. Even in the most tender and emotionally vulnerable moment of Dragon Maid's first episode, we can see the limitations Kobayashi has, and also how Toru's complete infatuation with her feeds into the limited progress she'll make with them for a while. Toru awakens from a nightmare, flashbacks to her time fighting in the other world, and her distress wakes up Kobayashi. While it's easy to look over this because Kobayashi's words end up being entirely suitable in easing Toru's mind, they're also fairly curt and impersonal. Kobayashi asks her if it hurt back then, and if it still hurts, and after hearing that it doesn't, she says, "That's good then," and gives Toru a goodnight before going back to sleep. While they do end up comforting Toru, these aren't actually words of comfort, really. Kobayashi inquires about what's wrong, confirms it isn't an issue, and says it's all fine then. A detail that's easy to miss is the eye contact in this scene. Kobayashi looks over at Toru as she tells her story, but shifts her gaze and starts looking forward again when she replies. In a lot of anime, this may not have much significance, but Kyoto Animation is generally very conscious of these details, and we'll see eye contact come into play again a bit later on. Kobayashi's words here seem a bit hollow or detached because of that awkwardness and loner lifestyle. She isn't used to connecting with people, so the best she can do is to see if this will be an issue, and wish Toru goodnight when it seems like it won't be moving forward. It is his detachedness that will begin to cause strife in later episodes, as Toru starts moving past a point where any acknowledgement whatsoever from Kobayashi is enough to validate her and make her totally content, and she starts worrying about a lack of investment in their relationship from Kobayashi. This is something you're unlikely to pick up on the significance of without the context of those later episodes, though. Excellent subtle establishment of your characters and foreshadowing, Dragon Maid. Well done. In the second episode, Kobayashi monologues that she'd like to learn more about Toru, she guesses, but recognizes it's a touchy subject and so decides to avoid it. This whole thought occurs in a quick 20 seconds, and only moments later a spectacularly animated action scene helps divert our attention away from it, simply allowing it to settle into our minds and help establish the boundaries Kobayashi is setting up between herself and Toru. Funnily enough, that distance of Kobayashi's helps bring some comfort to Kana, because she understands how to coexist with people you aren't necessarily totally comfortable with, telling Kana, "I won't ask you to be friends, let's live together, that's all," with a heartwarming shot of the 3 pairs of shoes lined up in the entryway closing out this sequence to let us know that they have in fact become a family of sorts. By the following morning, her suspicions have been tamed, and Kana's already clinging to Kobayashi in adorable fashion. Kobayashi is reciprocating this attention in the following episode, letting Lukoa know that she's been smiling more often since Toru became a part of her life, and reassuring Toru that she isn't a burden, that she's learned to enjoy this noisier, more busy life. Co-workers eventually notice this change as well, remarking about how she seems to have opened up a bit. This scene is immediately followed by Toru's romantic fantasy, though, which shows the significant gap that still exists between what she desires and Kobayashi is comfortable expressing. At the end of that day, when Toru gets personal and says she wanted to know more about Kobayashi, we once again get a lack of eye contact, with Kobayashi averting her gaze as she doesn't really know how to take those genuine feelings. Toru is still easily pleased, and happily follows Kobayashi home, even getting a glance back over her shoulder to sweeten the deal. Even when she does give Toru some tender advice that's clearly coming from a place of affection, try as she might, she's unable to truly get personal, hesitating and failing to take that step. This is smart anime storytelling, and how seemingly typical it is may serve to obscure that fact. So much of anime romance centers around awkwardness or shyness, but by exploring that angle not through erratic and hormonal teens, but instead adults who have a degree of self-awareness and more solidly developed senses of who they are, it manages to be engaging. The conflict here is not that Kobayashi is unable to understand her own feelings, or gets so flustered that she loses her basic abilities to communicate. Instead, there's a more fundamental issue, where the ways in which she does communicate those feelings is ultimately not enough for Toru. There's just something refreshing about it not being a matter of a couple being compatible and bothersome coincidences or youthful follies coming between them, but rather a conflict that arises from the fact that Kobayashi and Toru are not the perfect fairy tale couple kept apart by the cruel hands of fate, and instead having this basic difference in how they express affection that will prevent them from moving forward if it doesn't get addressed. Toru remains content and largely oblivious for a time though, and it takes an outside third party to really unsettle her and create some discontent. Just as Kobayashi's interactions with Takia did, her passionate discussion about maids here causes Toru to realize the relative shallowness of their relationship. There's no shared interest between them, no extended, intense discussions. Following this, we get a bit more progress. Toru learning about Kobayashi's upbringing, coming to better understand the essence of her love for her, and them being at a point where they're close enough to engage in a bit of rivalry, before these issues rear their head again. Just how fundamental and pressing they are getting emphasized by the fact that all this progress had occurred, and yet they still remain. Elma arrives, and Kobayashi being close with another dragon girl is what finally pushes Toru over the edge. Her initial voicing of her displeasure is, as these deeper issues often are in Dragon Maid, presented in a fairly breezy comedic manner. But then things begin to spiral out of control. Toru absolutely desperate for praise and validation now, to the point where, as Kobayashi makes note of, she's reverted to how she was when they first started living together, and when she lacked the degree of security in their bond that she had been slowly acquiring. That eye contact as a way of informing us about the characters shows up again here, this time with Kobayashi engaging earnestly as she asks Toru what's wrong, and Toru having her back turned to start off with, and then averting her gaze entirely when she closes up and gets defensive. The perspective we're given as Toru asks, "You can't tell what's wrong?" clues us in perfectly to the isolation and distance the fact that she has to ask this question at all makes her feel. Finally, we get our emotional payoff to this conflict, and the amount of nuanced build-up we've had to it makes it oh so satisfying. Along with, of course, the excellent composition for every shot of this sequence, storyboarded by this episode's director Yamada Naoko, who's certainly an expert at these tender, earnest moments. Kobayashi realizes how important this recognition and show of affection is to Toru, and Toru comes to learn that she's got to ask for them, and also that a lack of them doesn't mean Kobayashi doesn't care for her, but is merely a result of her experiences as someone who never had close friendships. Would you look at that? Interpersonal romantic strife grounded in believable character conflicts that is solved through a steady, slow progress of opening up to one another, eventual compromise, and a resolution to continue working towards further mutual understanding. There's a knowledge and appreciation of basic humanity on display here, and every element has a mindfulness to its presence. Looking to the relationship between Fafnir and Takia, we can see these same things making an appearance. As befitting a dragon, Fafnir was in the habit of hoarding items that held great value to him, but are actually rather worthless in the real world, making him a natural fit for the otaku lifestyle. Similarly to how Toru's instilled beliefs about the evils of humanity were called into question by Kobayashi's kindness, Fafnir has his worldview challenged by the kindness and charity shown towards him by Takia, and because he comes to view Takia as one of the rare good ones, there's a very real affection there, a sense that this relationship is precious and valuable, even if he is too much of a stoic to be willing to show it most of the time. From this basic aspect of dragon culture, we're given the backbone of a thoroughly charming bromance, and maybe even a bit more than that. Many anime get lost in all those conceptual elements of theirs, those more surface-level features, and so end up failing to be resonant in this way that Dragon Maid manages to. It's ultimately a relatively simple story about relatively simple relationships between relatively simple people, but because all of its component parts exist in service of helping us to buy into those people as people, it just works. And in its straightforward simplicity, we're given genuine, heartfelt interactions between people we're given reason to care for. A basic step that all too many series neglect to take as they rush ahead in pursuit of greater ambitions, and they'll fall flat on their faces for skipping out on that crucial step. After its first episode, I was still unsure about the series, resigning myself to the idea that it may simply be a mediocre comedy that I continued watching to experience the brilliant visual component, with that tender scene near the end giving me the greatest hope of it having some potential. And I think that's due in part to not having made that connection with these characters yet. Dragon Maid can lean on these characters and their relationships to fuel its comedy, which is what actually makes up the bulk of the series, because whatever you want the audience to experience, be it tension or romance or laughter, is made so much more effective by virtue of caring about who these things are happening to, and feeling a connection with them. If you'd like a deeper look into that laughter than I provided here, you can go check out the video on this series that my buddy Second Look just put out on the topic. And if this video made you feel a deeper connection with Kobayashi, or me, then consider supporting my work on Patreon, joining Bill, Sam, Izumi69, Darian Day Sotel, Joji Matthews, Culver James Kamai, Chris Wagner, Teencho37, Matchbox Matt, MathWiz97, Zach Penrith, Greg Greenwell, Cherry Boy Writer, and all of the other patrons who helped to make this possible.